The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when Fiona Ashford's horse stumbled into a hidden ravine, throwing her headlong into a drift that swallowed her whole like a hungry mouth. She clawed at the snow, but her fingers had already gone numb inside her thin leather gloves. The wind howled across the Wyoming plains with such fury that it seemed determined to erase every trace of human existence. Fiona had left Opal that morning against everyone's advice, needing to reach the neighboring ranch where her aunt lay dying. The telegram had said there wasn't much time, and Fiona couldn't bear the thought of arriving too late. Now, as the cold seeped through her coat and into her bones, she realized her stubbornness might cost her everything. Her horse had fled, probably heading back toward shelter by instinct. Smart animal. Fiona tried to stand, but her ankle gave way beneath her, sending fresh waves of pain shooting up her leg. She'd twisted it badly in the fall, maybe broken it. The snow kept falling, thick flakes that obscured everything beyond a few feet. She couldn't see the trail anymore. Couldn't see anything but white. She tried to call for help, but the wind tore the words from her lips and scattered them across the frozen wasteland. This was how it would end then. 22 years old, freezing to death alone in a blizzard because she'd been too proud to wait for the storm to pass. Her father had always said her independence would be the death of her. Turned out he was right. The cold was making her drowsy now. She'd heard that freezing to death was almost peaceful at the end, that you just drifted off to sleep. That didn't sound so terrible, better than the alternative anyway. Fiona closed her eyes, letting the snow pile up around her. Then someone grabbed her arm. The touch was so unexpected that Fiona's eyes flew open. Through the swirling snow, she made out the shape of a man, broad-shouldered and tall, his face mostly hidden beneath a wool scarf and wide-brimmed hat. He was saying something, but the wind carried his words away. She felt him slip his arms beneath her, lifting her from the snow as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Put me down," she tried to say, but her lips wouldn't form the words properly. The man pulled her against his chest, tucking her inside his heavy sheepskin coat. The warmth of his body was shocking after the numbing cold. Fiona wanted to protest, to tell this stranger that she could walk on her own, but her ankle throbbed and her whole body shook with violent shivers. "5 miles to town," the man said, his voice rough and deep, speaking close to her ear so she could hear him over the storm. "You hold on now, you hear me? Don't you dare give up." Fiona didn't have the strength to argue. She buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and wood smoke, and something indefinably masculine. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek, a reminder that life persisted even in the midst of this frozen hell. The journey that followed existed in Fiona's memory as a blur of pain and cold punctuated by moments of startling clarity. The way the man's arms never wavered, even though she knew carrying a full-grown woman through deep snow for miles had to be exhausting. The sound of his breathing, harsh and labored but never stopping. Once, when she started to slip away into unconsciousness, he shook her gently and said, "Stay with me. Tell me your name." "Fiona," she managed to whisper. "Fiona Ashford." "Lucas," he said. "Lucas Matthews." "You're going to be fine, Fiona. Just stay awake." She tried. God, how she tried. But the darkness kept pulling at her, and eventually, despite his urgings, she surrendered to it. When Fiona woke, she was lying in a bed in an unfamiliar room. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, filling the space with blessed warmth. Her ankle was wrapped in clean bandages and propped up on pillows. Someone had dressed her in a thick flannel nightgown that definitely wasn't hers. Her fingers and toes burned and tingled as feeling returned to them. "You're awake." The voice came from the corner of the room, and Fiona turned her head to see the man who had saved her. Lucas Matthews. In the firelight, without the scarf hiding his features, she could finally see his face properly. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with strong, angular features that hadn't quite lost the last vestiges of youth. His dark hair was still damp from the snow, curling slightly at the edges. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking pale blue that seemed almost gray in the dim light. Those eyes studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "How long was I out?" Fiona asked, her voice hoarse. "About 6 hours. Doc Patterson says you're lucky. No frostbite, just a badly sprained ankle and some bruising. You came close, though. Another hour out there and we'd be having a very different conversation." Fiona looked down at her bandaged ankle, then back at Lucas. "You carried me 5 miles in that storm." It wasn't a question, but Lucas nodded anyway. "Closer to 6, actually. I found you about a mile past the creek fork." "Why?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Why did I carry you? What else was I supposed to do, leave you there to freeze?" "Most people wouldn't have been out in that storm at all." "What were you doing out there?" Lucas shifted in his chair, and for the first time, Fiona noticed the fatigue in his face. He looked exhausted, dark circles under those striking eyes. "I was checking the line shacks, making sure none of the ranch hands got stranded. Saw your horse running loose and went looking. Found you half buried about 20 minutes later." "Thank you," Fiona said softly. "You saved my life." He waved off her gratitude with a rough gesture. "Any decent person would have done the same. You should rest now. Doc says you need to stay off that ankle for at least a week, maybe 2. "A week? I can't stay here for a week. I need to get to the Harrison Ranch. My aunt is dying." Lucas's expression softened slightly. "I know. I sent word to them yesterday morning, soon as the storm broke enough to get a rider through. Got a reply back this afternoon. Your aunt passed peacefully in her sleep 2 nights ago. I'm sorry for your loss." The news hit Fiona like a physical blow. Too late. She'd been too late after all. And she'd nearly killed herself in the process. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She turned her face toward the wall, not wanting this stranger to see her cry. She heard Lucas stand, the scrape of his chair against the wooden floor. For a moment she thought he was leaving, giving her privacy to grieve. Then she felt the bed dip as he sat down beside her. His hand, large and warm and surprisingly gentle, touched her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said again, and the genuine compassion in his voice made her cry harder. Lucas didn't try to stop her tears or tell her everything would be fine. He just sat there, his hand steady on her shoulder, offering silent comfort until the storm of grief passed. When Fiona finally managed to compose herself, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and turned to look at him. "Where am I?" she asked. "My ranch. The Double M, about 3 miles outside Opal. It's just me and my foreman staying here right now. The rest of the hands are bunking in the main house down at the southern pasture while we get the new barn built. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was here earlier. She's the one who got you changed and bandaged up. She'll be back in the morning." Fiona nodded, grateful to know that another woman had been present. For all that Lucas had saved her life, propriety still mattered, especially in a small town like Opal. "How bad is the storm now?" "Dying down. Should be clear by tomorrow. But the snow's deep, and more is coming later in the week. This is just the beginning of what's shaping up to be a brutal winter." "It's only November," Fiona said. "November in Wyoming, 1883. I've lived here my whole life, and I've never seen a storm hit this hard this early in the season. My grandfather always said the worst winters start with a howl. Seems he was right." Fiona tried to sit up straighter, wincing as her ankle protested. Lucas immediately moved to help her, arranging the pillows behind her back. His hands were careful, almost courteous, but Fiona couldn't help noticing their strength. These were working hands, calloused and rough, hands that had carried her through miles of snow without faltering. "You must be exhausted," she said. "When did you last sleep?" Lucas rubbed a hand across his jaw, and Fiona heard the rasp of stubble. "Been a while," he admitted, "but I'm fine. You're the one who nearly froze to death, because of my own foolishness. You, on the other hand, risked your life to save a stranger. The least I can do is not keep you from your rest." A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and unexpectedly handsome. "You're not keeping me from anything. I wanted to make sure you woke up. Now that you have, I can breathe a little easier." There was something in the way he said it, a warmth that went beyond simple concern for an injured person's welfare. Fiona felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She told herself it was just gratitude, nothing more. She didn't even know this man, but she wanted to. The thought surprised her. Fiona had never been the type to lose her head over a man, no matter how handsome or heroic. She had plans for her life, ambitions that didn't include getting tangled up with some rancher in the middle of Wyoming. She'd only come to Opal 6 months ago to help her father with his general store after her mother died. The plan was to stay a year, maybe 2, then head back east to Philadelphia, where she could pursue her dream of becoming a teacher at a proper school. Yet here she was, lying in this man's bed, wearing his nightgown, looking into those remarkable eyes and feeling things she had no business feeling. "You should eat something," Lucas said, breaking the spell. "I'll have Mrs. Chen bring you some soup in the morning. For tonight, there's water on the nightstand if you get thirsty." "Where will you sleep?" Fiona asked, suddenly aware that this was likely his bedroom. "I've got a bedroll in the study. I'll be fine. I can't take your bed. This is your house. And you're my guest, an injured guest. You're staying put." His tone brooked no argument, but it wasn't unkind. "Try to sleep, Fiona. You're safe here." He stood to leave, and Fiona found herself not wanting him to go. "Lucas," he turned back, eyebrows raised, "thank you for everything." That almost smile again. "Get some rest." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Fiona lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the wind had died down to a low moan. The fire popped and crackled, filling the room with dancing shadows. Her ankle ached, but the pain was manageable. What kept her awake wasn't physical discomfort, but the memory of strong arms holding her close, of a deep voice telling her to hold on, of eyes the color of winter sky looking at her with concern, and something else, something she couldn't quite name. She was in trouble, Fiona realized. Deep trouble of an entirely different sort than a blizzard. When morning came, pale sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating a world transformed by snow. Fiona sat up carefully, testing her ankle. Still painful, but she could wiggle her toes without too much agony. That was something. The door opened after a soft knock, and a small, elderly Chinese woman entered carrying a tray. She had a kind face, deeply lined with age, and bright, intelligent eyes. "Good morning, Miss Ashford. I am Mrs. Chen. I am glad to see you awake and looking better. Mr. Lucas was very worried about you." "Thank you for taking care of me," Fiona said, accepting the tray. The smell of chicken soup and fresh bread made her stomach growl. Mrs. Chen smiled. "It is my pleasure. You gave us quite a scare. When Mr. Lucas came through that door carrying you, I thought for certain you were already gone. He would not put you down until I assured him you still breathed." Fiona felt that flutter again, that dangerous warmth. "He seems like a good man." "The best," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "He took me in when no one else in this territory would hire a Chinese woman. When my husband died in the mines, Mr. Lucas gave me a place to stay and honest work. He is a good man, yes, but also a lonely one. Lonely. Mrs. Chen began tidying the room, her movements quick and efficient. He works too hard, that one. Always working. The ranch, the cattle, building and fixing and planning. He has no time for anything else, no time to find a wife, start a family. I tell him he will work himself into an early grave, but he does not listen to an old woman. Fiona ate her soup slowly, thinking about this. Lucas didn't seem like the lonely type. He seemed self-sufficient, confident, the kind of man who didn't need anyone. But maybe that was just the face he showed the world. Maybe underneath, he was as isolated as any soul in this harsh country. "How long has he run this ranch?" she asked. 5 years since his father died. It was much smaller then. Mr. Lucas has worked hard to expand it to make it profitable. He is determined to build something that will last, something he can be proud of. But pride is cold comfort on a winter night, I tell him. Before Fiona could respond, there was a knock at the door. Lucas entered, and Fiona's breath caught at the sight of him. Cleaned up and rested, wearing a fresh shirt and with his dark hair still damp from washing, he was even more striking than she'd remembered. He looked almost bashful as his eyes met hers. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you and Mrs. Chen. I think I could probably manage to get up and move around a bit." "Not on that ankle, you couldn't," Lucas said firmly. "Doc Patterson was clear, you need to stay off it. For 2 weeks, that's ridiculous. I have responsibilities. My father needs help at the store." "I already sent word to your father. He knows you're safe and recovering here. He said to tell you not to worry, that he's managing fine and you should focus on getting better." Fiona felt a surge of frustration. She wasn't used to being helpless, wasn't used to having other people make decisions for her. "I can't just stay here for 2 weeks. That's an imposition on you." "It's not an imposition. I've got plenty of room and Mrs. Chen enjoys having someone else to fuss over besides me." "This is true," Mrs. Chen said, beaming. "It gets very quiet here. Another woman in the house is a nice change." "But people will talk," Fiona protested. "A single woman staying at a bachelor's ranch, even with a chaperone. You know how small towns are." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. I'm not going to send you home before you're healed just because some gossips might wag their tongues. Besides, Mrs. Chen is here. Everything is proper." There was a stubborn set to his shoulders that told Fiona she wasn't going to win this argument. Part of her, the sensible part, knew she should insist on going back to town anyway. But another part, a part she didn't quite want to examine too closely, was glad to have an excuse to stay. "Fine," she said, trying to sound reluctant. "But only until my ankle is better. And I'm not going to just lie here doing nothing. There must be something I can help with." Lucas looked amused. "You just woke up from nearly freezing to death and you're already looking for work. I don't like being idle." "I can see that. All right, we'll find something for you to do. But not today. Today you rest." Over the following days, a routine developed. Fiona spent her mornings in bed, reading from Lucas's surprisingly extensive library. He had books on everything from cattle breeding to Shakespeare, from astronomy to crop rotation. In the afternoons, when Mrs. Chen helped her to the main room, she would sit by the fire and work on mending or help prepare vegetables for dinner. Lucas would join them for the evening meal, and afterward, they would talk. That was when Fiona began to truly know him. She learned that he'd grown up on this ranch, the only child of parents who'd come west during the gold rush and stayed to raise cattle instead. His mother had died when he was 12, his father 3 years ago. He'd built the Double M from a struggling operation into one of the most successful ranches in the territory through sheer determination and backbreaking work. "Why do you do it?" Fiona asked one evening, watching the firelight play across his features. "Work yourself so hard, I mean." What are you trying to prove? Lucas was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. My father had a vision for this place. He wanted to build something that would last, something that mattered, but he died before he could see it through. I guess I'm trying to finish what he started, to prove that his dreams weren't just dreams. And what about your dreams? Fiona asked softly. What do you want, Lucas? He turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her heart race. I used to think I knew. Build the ranch, make it successful, maybe start a family someday when there was time. But lately, I've been wondering if I had it backwards, if maybe the ranch was supposed to be the means, not the end. What changed? I carried a woman 5 miles through a blizzard, he said quietly. And somewhere during that walk, I realized how empty this house felt, how empty my life felt. I'd been so focused on building something for the future that I forgot to live in the present. Fiona's mouth went dry. The way he was looking at her, the way his voice softened when he spoke, left no doubt about his meaning. He wasn't talking in abstracts, he was talking about her. Lucas, she began, but she didn't know how to finish. What could she say? That she felt the same pull, the same impossible attraction. That every day she spent here made the thought of leaving more painful. She barely knew him. This was madness, but it was a madness she couldn't seem to shake. As November turned to December, Fiona's ankle healed, but the snow kept falling. The roads to town became impassable, trapping her at the Double M. She should have been frustrated, anxious to leave. Instead, she found herself grateful for every additional day. She and Lucas fell into an easy companionship that surprised them both. In the mornings, after he finished his chores, he would teach her to play chess by the fire. She was a quick learner, and soon she was winning as often as she lost. In the afternoons, she would read aloud to him while he worked on ranch accounts or repaired tack. His favorite was Shakespeare, and he could recite entire passages from memory. My mother loved the plays, he explained one day. She'd act out all the parts for me when I was little. I thought everyone's mother did that. Fiona laughed. Mine preferred needlepoint and gossip. I can't imagine her reciting Shakespeare. What was she like? Your mother? The question caught Fiona off guard. She rarely talked about her mother, even with people who'd known her well. But there was something about Lucas that made her want to open up, to share the parts of herself she usually kept hidden. She was practical, Fiona said slowly. Sensible. She had very clear ideas about how things should be done and little patience for deviation. When my father wanted to move west, she fought him for 3 years before finally agreeing. I think she regretted it every day after. But you didn't. No, I loved it out here. Still do, actually. There's a freedom in the West that you don't find back east. Room to breathe, to be yourself. My mother never understood that. She tried so hard to recreate Philadelphia in Wyoming, to live according to all the old rules. It made her miserable. Is that why you wanted to go back? To Philadelphia? Fiona nodded. I thought so. I thought that was where I belonged, where I could make something of myself. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe I was running towards someone else's dream, just like you were. And what's your dream, Fiona? She looked at him, at this man who had saved her life and then, without meaning to, had stolen her heart. I'm still figuring that out. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if she were something precious. Fiona, he said, his voice rough. I know this is probably too soon and maybe I've got no right to say it, but I need you to know. These past few weeks, having you here, they've been the best of my life. When I think about you leaving, about this house going back to being empty, I can't stand it. Fiona's heart hammered in her chest. Lucas, You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, wherever you go, I'll respect it, but I had to tell you how I feel." Before she could lose her nerve, Fiona leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief, chaste, barely more than a press of lips, but it was enough. When she pulled back, Lucas was staring at her with wonder. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. I know I should. We barely know each other. This is crazy, but I don't want to leave." Lucas cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Then stay. Stay and let me court you properly. Let me show you that this isn't crazy, that what we have is real. People will talk. Let them. I don't care about gossip, I care about you." This time, when they kissed, it was deeper, more certain. Fiona felt like she was falling, but Lucas's arms were strong around her, keeping her safe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too. But that just means it matters, right?" Fiona laughed shakily. "When did you get so wise? Must be all that Shakespeare." As December progressed, true to his word, Lucas courted Fiona with old-fashioned determination. He brought her wildflowers he'd somehow found beneath the snow, picked from the hothouse Mrs. Chen maintained for herbs. He took her on sleigh rides across the snow-covered ranch when her ankle was strong enough, bundling her in furs and pointing out landmarks. He wrote her terrible, earnest poetry that made her laugh and cry at the same time, and he talked to her. Really talked about everything and nothing. His fears about failing to live up to his father's legacy. His dreams of expanding the ranch into something even bigger. His memories of growing up wild and free on the Wyoming plains. His loneliness in the years since his father's death, and how he'd filled that emptiness with work, until he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to want something beyond the next day's labor. Fiona shared her own stories in return. Her childhood in Philadelphia, the daughter of a shopkeeper and his dissatisfied wife. The relief she'd felt when they'd finally moved west, even though it meant leaving behind everything familiar. Her mother's slow decline after the move, as if the frontier had leached the life from her. The guilt Fiona still carried over being glad to be free of Philadelphia's constraints, even though it had cost her mother so much. "You can't live your life for someone else's happiness," Lucas told her one night as they sat by the fire. "Not even your mother's. Everyone has to find their own way." "That's what my father said after she died. That she'd made her choice and I shouldn't feel guilty for making a different one. But it's hard not to wonder if things would have been different if I'd tried harder to be what she wanted. You'd have been miserable, and she'd have known it. That wouldn't have made anyone happy." Fiona knew he was right, but it still hurt. Some wounds went too deep for logic to heal them completely. Lucas seemed to understand that. He didn't try to fix her pain or tell her she was wrong to feel it. He just held her hand and sat with her in the quiet, and somehow that was enough. Christmas came on a bright, cold day with the land buried under 3 feet of snow. Mrs. Chen outdid herself with dinner, producing a roasted goose and all the trimmings. After the meal, Lucas presented Fiona with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your teaching," he explained. "I know you want to teach, and I thought maybe you could use this to plan lessons or write down your thoughts." Fiona ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched beyond words. He'd listened to her dreams and taken them seriously, even though they didn't necessarily include him. That kind of selfless support meant more than any grand romantic gesture. "Thank you," she said, kissing his cheek. "It's perfect." She gave him a scarf she'd knitted in secret, working on it whenever he was out doing chores. It wasn't very good. Her stitches were uneven, and there was a hole near one end where she'd dropped a stitch and couldn't figure out how to fix it. But Lucas put it on immediately, wrapping it around his neck with such obvious pleasure that Fiona's eyes stung with tears. "Best gift I ever got," he declared, and she could tell he meant it. That night after Mrs. Chen had retired to her room, Fiona and Lucas sat together on the settee, watching the fire burn low. Snow drifted past the windows, soft and silent. Lucas had his arm around her shoulders and Fiona was tucked against his side, her head resting on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "I love you," Lucas said quietly. "I know it's fast and maybe you're not ready to hear it, but it's true. I love you, Fiona." Fiona's breath caught. She'd known, of course. Known it in the way he looked at her, the way he said her name, the care he took with everything concerning her. But hearing the words made it real, undeniable. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since you carried me through that blizzard." Lucas pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face. Yeah, you were so determined, so absolutely certain that you could save me. How could I not fall in love with that?" He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Fiona felt the last of her reservations melt away. This was right. He was right. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's soon, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. Marry me, Fiona." For a moment, Fiona couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Then she nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes, I'll marry you." Lucas let out a whoop of joy that probably woke Mrs. Chen and kissed Fiona again. They stayed up late into the night, making plans and dreaming about the future. Lucas wanted to marry as soon as possible, but Fiona insisted they wait until spring, when the roads cleared and they could have a proper wedding with both their families present. "Fine," Lucas grumbled good-naturedly. "But I'm not waiting longer than April." "Deal," Fiona said, laughing. The rest of the winter passed in a blur of happiness. Lucas and Fiona spent every moment they could together, learning each other's quirks and habits, building the foundation for a life together. Fiona discovered that Lucas sang off-key in the bath and had a terrible sweet tooth he tried to hide. Lucas learned that Fiona talked in her sleep and hogged the blankets when she napped on the settee. In February, when a brief thaw made the roads passable, Fiona insisted on going to town to see her father and settle her affairs. Lucas went with her, driving the sleigh carefully through the slushy snow. When they reached Opal, they found the entire town buzzing with gossip about Fiona's extended stay at the Double M. "Let them talk," Lucas said, taking her hand as they walked into her father's store. James Ashford was a tall, spare man with Fiona's eyes and a perpetual expression of mild concern. When he saw his daughter and Lucas enter together, hand in hand, his eyebrows rose toward his hairline. "Well," he said mildly, "I see things have progressed." "Papa," Fiona said, suddenly nervous, "Lucas and I are engaged. We want to marry in April if you'll give us your blessing." James looked between them, taking in their joined hands and the way they stood close together, as if unable to bear separation. A slow smile spread across his face. "I was wondering when you'd make an honest woman of her," he told Lucas. "Another few weeks and I'd have had to come out there with my shotgun." "Papa," Fiona exclaimed, scandalized, but James just laughed. "I'm happy for you both. Lucas, you're a good man. You saved my daughter's life. There's no one I'd rather see her marry. You have my blessing and my gratitude." The two men shook hands and then James pulled Fiona into a hug. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "It's not too fast." "I'm sure," Fiona said. "I love him, Papa, more than I thought possible. Then that's all that matters." "Your mother would have had opinions about the propriety of it all, but I think she'd have been happy too. He makes you smile, and that's what counts." They spent the afternoon going through Fiona's belongings, deciding what to bring to the ranch and what to leave. It wasn't much. Fiona had always traveled light. By the time they loaded the sleigh and said their goodbyes, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink. "Come visit us soon," Fiona told her father. "Once we're married and settled." "I will," James promised. "And Fiona, be happy. That's all I've ever wanted for you." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought. As the Double M came into view, its lights warm and welcoming against the darkening sky, Fiona felt a surge of rightness. This was home now. Not Philadelphia, not her father's rooms above the store, but here, with Lucas. Planning the wedding gave Fiona something to focus on during the long winter weeks. She and Mrs. Chen spent hours poring over recipes and discussing decorations. Lucas threw himself into preparations of his own, determined to have the house in perfect condition for their wedding day. He repainted the bedroom, fixed the squeaky board in the hallway, and even installed a new copper bathtub he'd had shipped from Denver. "You don't have to do all this," Fiona protested, watching him work. "I want everything to be perfect for you," Lucas said simply. "It already is. You're here. That's all that matters." But she was touched by his efforts all the same. March brought warmer weather and the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing brown grass and patches of mud. Lucas's cattle, which had been sheltering in the south pastures all winter, started making their way north again. The ranch hands returned from their winter quarters, and suddenly the Double M was bustling with activity. Fiona threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. She'd been raised in a store, surrounded by inventory and ledgers, so managing the household accounts came naturally. She reorganized Lucas's chaotic filing system and discovered he'd been undercharging several customers for months. She also started teaching the ranch hands to read in the evenings, fulfilling her dream of being a teacher in a way she'd never anticipated. "You're a natural," Lucas told her, watching her work with one of the younger cowboys who'd never learned his letters. "They'd follow you anywhere." "They follow you," Fiona corrected. "I just help with the words." But she was pleased all the same. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? To make a difference, to teach, to matter. She'd thought she needed a formal school in a city to do that, but maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe the place didn't matter as much as the work itself. April arrived with a burst of wildflowers and warm breezes. The date they'd chosen for the wedding was April 15th, a Saturday. As the day approached, Fiona found herself getting nervous. Not about marrying Lucas. She'd never been more certain of anything. But about the ceremony itself, about standing up in front of everyone and making such a public commitment. What if I trip walking down the aisle? She fretted to Mrs. Chen the night before the wedding. "Then Mr. Lucas will catch you, just like he caught you in the snow," Mrs. Chen said serenely. "Stop worrying. Tomorrow will be perfect." And it was. The ceremony took place at Opal's small church with half the town in attendance. Fiona wore a simple white dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her slimmer frame. Lucas wore a new suit that made his eyes look impossibly blue. When Fiona walked down the aisle on her father's arm and saw Lucas waiting for her at the altar, his face full of love and wonder, all her nerves disappeared. The ceremony itself was brief. The minister, Reverend Thompson, kept his remarks short and sincere. When it came time for the vows, Fiona's voice rang out clear and strong. "I, Fiona Ashford, take you, Lucas Matthews, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Lucas's vows were equally firm, his eyes never leaving hers. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them man and wife, Lucas kissed her with such tenderness that Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. The reception at the Double M was a rowdy, joyful affair. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with the food, and someone had brought a fiddle for dancing. Fiona danced with her father, with several of the ranch hands, and most of all with Lucas, who held her close and whispered sweet words in her ear that made her blush. As the sun set and the guests began to drift away, Lucas and Fiona stood on the porch, watching the last of them go. Lucas had his arm around her waist, and Fiona leaned into him, content. "Happy?" he asked. "Incredibly. You, more than I ever thought possible." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I promise you, Fiona, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice." "I could never regret choosing you," Fiona said, touching his face. "You're everything I never knew I wanted." That night, as they lay together in the bedroom Lucas had so carefully prepared, Fiona marveled at how much her life had changed in just 5 months. She'd gone from nearly freezing to death in a blizzard to being married to the man who'd saved her, building a life in a place she'd never expected to call home. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, running his fingers through her hair. "How grateful I am for that blizzard," Fiona said. "How strange it is that the worst day of my life led to the best." "Fate," Lucas said. "It had to be. What else would have put me in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to find you?" "Practical ranch management," Fiona teased. "You were checking the line shacks, remember?" "All right, practical fate then. The point is, I found you, and I'm never letting you go. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere." The first year of marriage brought its share of adjustments. Fiona had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of work that defined each season. Spring meant calving and branding. Summer was for growing hay and maintaining the infrastructure. Fall brought the cattle drive to market, and winter was for survival. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done in her father's store, but Fiona thrived on the challenge. She also discovered she had a talent for working with the ranch's finances. Under her management, the Double M began to turn a larger profit than it ever had before. She negotiated better prices for their cattle, found more efficient suppliers for feed and equipment, and even invested some of their earnings in a new breeding bull that improved their herd significantly. "I married a genius," Lucas declared one evening, looking over the account books. "You married a shopkeeper's daughter who knows how to count," Fiona corrected, but she was pleased. Their first real test came that summer when a drought threatened to devastate the ranch. For weeks, no rain fell. The grass turned brown and brittle, and the creek that supplied water to the northern pastures began to run dry. Lucas worked himself nearly to exhaustion, digging new wells and moving cattle to areas with better water access. Fiona worked beside him, despite his protests that she should stay in the house where it was cooler. Together, they fought to save the ranch, refusing to give up even when it seemed hopeless. And somehow, through sheer determination and a lot of luck, they made it through. When the rains finally came in late August, they stood together in the downpour, laughing like children. "We did it," Lucas said, pulling her close. "We actually did it. Of course we did. We're a team." That had been the real revelation of marriage for Fiona, the partnership of it. She and Lucas weren't just husband and wife. They were true partners in every sense of the word. They made decisions together, shared the work and the worry, supported each other through the hard times, and celebrated together during the good. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. In the fall of their second year of marriage, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but she waited to be sure before telling Lucas. When she finally broke the news over dinner one evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We're going to have a baby." "Yes," Fiona said, laughing at his expression. "In the spring, I think. Are you happy?" Lucas came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Fiona, this is everything. You've given me everything. The pregnancy was not easy. Fiona was sick for the first few months, unable to keep much food down. Lucas fretted constantly, treating her like she was made of glass. It drove Fiona crazy, but it was also sweet. She knew his worry came from love, from the memory of his own mother dying when he was young. "I'm not going anywhere," she assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." "I know, I just can't help worrying." As winter turned to spring, Fiona grew large and uncomfortable. The baby seemed to be all elbows and knees, constantly kicking and moving. Lucas would put his hand on her belly and laugh when he felt the movements, talking to the baby about the ranch and the horses and all the things they'd do together. In late April, almost exactly 3 years after their wedding, Fiona went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Lucas stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. Mrs. Chen and the midwife from town, a competent woman named Sarah Miller, managed the practical aspects while Lucas provided emotional support. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." And Fiona did. As the sun reached its zenith on that warm spring day, she gave one final push and felt the baby slip free. A moment later, a lusty cry filled the room. "It's a boy," Mrs. Miller announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." Fiona collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated. Lucas was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as Mrs. Miller cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket. When she placed the infant in Fiona's arms, Lucas sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around both of them, completing the circle. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "Look at him, Fiona. We made that." The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same pale blue as his father's. His little face was scrunched up with indignation at being thrust into the cold world, but to Fiona, he was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "What should we name him?" she asked. They'd discussed names for months without reaching a decision. But now, looking down at her son, Fiona knew exactly what his name should be. "James," she said. "After my father, James Lucas Matthews." Lucas's eyes filled with fresh tears. "James, it's perfect." Little Jamie, as they called him, transformed their lives in ways both wonderful and challenging. He was a demanding baby, waking multiple times each night and requiring constant attention. Fiona, who thought she knew what tired felt like, discovered she'd had no idea. Some days, she could barely keep her eyes open, but Lucas was a devoted father from the start. He got up for nighttime feedings, walking the floor with Jamie when the baby was fussy. He changed diapers without complaint and learned to swaddle the baby just right. Watching him with their son, seeing the gentleness and patience he showed, made Fiona fall in love with him all over again. "You're a natural at this," she told him one night, watching him rock Jamie to sleep. "I'm terrified every second that I'll do something wrong," Lucas admitted. "But I love him so much it hurts. I never knew you could love someone this much." As Jamie grew from an infant to a toddler, his personality began to emerge. He was curious and fearless, always getting into things he shouldn't. He learned to walk early, taking his first steps at just 10 months old, and from that point on, keeping him safe became a full-time job. "He's going to give us gray hair before we're 30, Fiona said, hauling Jamie away from the horse trough for the 3rd time in one afternoon. "Takes after his mother," Lucas said, grinning. "Stubborn and determined." I seem to recall you being the one who carried a woman 5 miles through a blizzard because you were too stubborn to leave her. I think he gets it from both of us." Life settled into a new rhythm, one built around Jamie's needs and the demands of the ranch. Fiona had less time for the account books now, but she still managed to keep everything running smoothly. Lucas hired an additional hand to help with the extra work, a young man named Tom who showed promise as a cattleman. When Jamie was 2, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect now. She also had Jamie to chase after, which left less time to focus on her discomforts. Their second child, a daughter they named Anna Rose, was born on a cold December morning. Unlike Jamie, who'd made his entrance into the world with maximum drama, Anna arrived quickly and quietly, slipping into life as if she'd been planning her arrival for months. "She's so peaceful," Lucas marveled, holding his daughter for the first time. "Look at her, Fiona. She's already asleep." Anna proved to be a calm, easy baby, the complete opposite of her brother. Where Jamie had demanded constant attention, Anna was content to lie in her cradle and watch the world go by. Jamie, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, talking to her in his garbled toddler language and showing her his favorite toys. "Sissy," he would say proudly, patting her gently. "My sissy." Watching her children together, seeing the family she and Lucas had created, filled Fiona with a contentment she'd never imagined possible. This was what happiness looked like. Not some grand adventure or impressive achievement, but this: a warm house, healthy children, and a man who loved her completely. The ranch continued to prosper over the years. Lucas expanded their holdings, buying up neighboring land as it became available. They built a new barn, a proper bunkhouse for the hands, and even added on to the main house, giving the children their own rooms and creating a proper office for Fiona to manage the books. Jamie grew into a bright, energetic boy who lived for time, spent outdoors with his father. By the time he was 5, he could sit a horse better than some grown men and knew the name of every cow on the ranch. Anna, 3 years younger, was quieter and more studious. She loved books and learning, reminding Fiona of herself at that age. When Jamie was 6 and Anna was 3, Fiona gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Thomas Edward, called Teddy. Teddy was a happy, chubby baby who smiled at everyone and everything. He completed their family, bringing the number to 5. "3 children," Lucas said one evening, watching Fiona nurse Teddy while Jamie and Anna played on the floor nearby. "Can you believe it? 5 years ago it was just you and me." "Time flies," Fiona agreed. "Sometimes I can barely remember what life was like before all this chaos." "Do you miss it? The quiet, I mean." Fiona looked around the room, taking in the scattered toys, the children's laughter, the organized chaos that defined their life now. "Not for a second. This is everything I never knew I wanted." As the children grew, so did the ranch. The Double M became one of the most successful operations in Wyoming, known for the quality of its cattle and the fairness of its owner. Lucas treated his employees well, paying them fairly and providing good living conditions. In return, he earned their loyalty and hard work. Fiona continued to manage the business side of things, proving to have a shrewd head for investments. She diversified their holdings, buying shares in the new railroad that was pushing through Wyoming and investing in several businesses in Opal. Her father, who'd initially been skeptical of her business acumen, was forced to admit she'd surpassed him. "You've got your mother's brains and my business sense," James told her during one of his visits. "Dangerous combination." The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Jamie lost his first tooth, then his second. Anna learned to read at 4, devouring every book she could get her hands on. Teddy took his first steps, then his first tumble off a horse, giving everyone a scare but emerging with just a few bruises. Through it all, Lucas and Fiona's love deepened and matured. They weren't newlyweds anymore, caught up in the first rush of passion. Instead, they'd built something stronger, a partnership forged through shared struggles and triumphs. They knew each other's flaws and loved each other anyway. They fought sometimes, usually about the children or ranch business, but they always made up before bed, refusing to let grievances fester. I read once that the secret to a long marriage is never going to bed angry, Lucas said after one such argument. Who said anything about going to bed? Fiona teased, I'm still mad at you. But she wasn't, not really, and Lucas knew it. He pulled her close and kissed her until she laughed and pushed him away. You fight dirty, she accused. I fight to win, he corrected. And winning means making my wife smile. When Jamie turned 10, he started asking to help with the real ranch work, not just the small chores he'd been doing. Lucas was hesitant at first, worried about his son getting hurt, but Fiona convinced him to give Jamie a chance. He's ready, she said. And he needs to feel useful, like he's contributing. That's important at his age. So Lucas started taking Jamie on the cattle drives, teaching him the skills he'd need to one day run the ranch himself. Jamie proved to be a quick learner with a natural talent for working with animals. Lucas's pride in his son was evident to everyone. Anna, meanwhile, had become a voracious reader and showed an interest in teaching. Fiona started giving her small lessons to conduct with Teddy, who was now old enough to learn his letters. Anna took to it immediately, creating elaborate lesson plans and being surprisingly patient with her younger brother's short attention span. She's going to be a teacher, Fiona predicted. A real one, not just someone helping ranch hands with their reading. Is that what you want it to be? Lucas asked. Before the blizzard, I mean. Yes, Fiona said, but I don't regret the way things turned out, not for a second. And she meant it. Yes, she'd once dreamed of teaching in a proper school, of making a name for herself in Philadelphia or some other eastern city. But those dreams belonged to a different woman, one who hadn't yet learned that the best life was the one you built with your own hands, surrounded by people you loved. Fiona's father passed away peacefully in his sleep when Jamie was 12. It was a blow, losing the last link to her childhood, but it was softened by the fact that James had lived to see his grandchildren grow, to know that his daughter was happy and thriving. They buried him in Opal Cemetery next to Fiona's mother, reuniting them at last. After the funeral, as they stood by the grave, Lucas put his arm around Fiona's shoulders. He was a good man. He'd be proud of what you've built. What we've built, Fiona corrected, leaning into him. I couldn't have done any of this without you. That night, unable to sleep, Fiona went out to the porch and looked up at the stars. It was a clear night, the kind where you could see the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. She thought about her father, about her mother, about the long path that had led her to this moment. The door opened behind her and Lucas stepped out, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Couldn't sleep either, just thinking. About everything. About how strange life is, how one day you're heading in one direction and the next everything's changed. Regrets? None, not a single one. I was just thinking about that day, the blizzard. If I'd listened to everyone and stayed in town, if you hadn't been checking those lined shacks, if I'd been buried just a little deeper in the snow, we'd have never met. None of this would exist. Lucas pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. But it did happen, exactly the way it was supposed to, and here we are. Here we are, Fiona agreed. They stood there for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, comfortable in the silence. After 20-some years together, they didn't always need words. Sometimes just being together was enough. As Jamie grew into adolescence and then young adulthood, it became clear he was born to be a rancher. He had Lucas's practical nature and Fiona's head for business, a combination that served him well. At 18, he started taking on more responsibility, managing entire sections of the ranch on his own. Anna, at 15, announced her intention to attend a teacher's college back east. Fiona's first instinct was to say no to keep her daughter close and safe. But Lucas reminded her that Anna needed to follow her own path, just as Fiona had. Besides, he said, she'll come back. Wyoming is in her blood. She just needs to see what else is out there first. He was right, as usual. Anna spent 3 years at college, earning her teaching certificate and experiencing life in a city. But when she graduated, she came home to Opal and took a position teaching at the town school. She married a young lawyer named David Preston 2 years later, and they settled on a small piece of land near the Double M. Teddy, the youngest, turned out to have a gift with horses. He could gentle the wildest bronco, seemed to understand what the animals were thinking. At Lucas's suggestion, they started a side business breeding and training horses, with Teddy in charge. It proved to be quite profitable, adding another revenue stream to the ranch. When Fiona turned 45, Lucas threw her a surprise party at the ranch. All their friends and neighbors came, along with Anna and her family, Jamie and his new wife Sarah, and Teddy. It was a warm summer evening and they set up tables outside under the stars. 23 years, Lucas said in his speech, raising a glass of whiskey. 23 years since a blizzard tried to take the love of my life, and I was lucky enough to find her. I'd carry her 5 miles through snow every day for the rest of my life if it meant getting to spend it with her. To Fiona, the woman who saved my life just as surely as I saved hers. Everyone cheered and drank, and Fiona felt tears slide down her cheeks. Lucas crossed to her and wiped them away gently. Happy tears, I hope. The happiest. I love you, Lucas Matthews. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. He kissed her to more cheers from the assembled crowd, and the party continued late into the night. As Fiona looked around at the people gathered there, at the family she and Lucas had built, and the life they'd created together, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Mrs. Chen passed away at the age of 82, mourned by everyone who'd known her. Jamie and Sarah had 4 children of their own, keeping the next generation of Matthews firmly established on the Double M. Anna had 3, and even Teddy eventually married and started a family, settling on a piece of land they'd carved out of the ranch for him. Through it all, Lucas and Fiona remained the heart of the operation. Even as they aged and their children took on more responsibility, they continued to work side by side, making decisions together, supporting each other through the inevitable challenges that came with ranching. On a cold December evening, nearly 30 years after Lucas had pulled Fiona from the snow, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets and watching the snow fall. It wasn't a blizzard this time, just a gentle snow that dusted the land with white. You ever think about that day? Fiona asked. The blizzard, all the time, Lucas admitted. I think about how close I came to not finding you if I'd checked a different line shack first if I'd been an hour later. I'd have lost you before I ever knew you. Fate, Fiona said, echoing what he'd told her so many years ago. Maybe. Or maybe just dumb luck. Either way, I'm grateful for it every single day. Fiona shifted closer, tucking herself against his side the way she'd done 1,000 times before. Lucas's arm came around her automatically, holding her close. They fit together perfectly, 2 pieces of the same whole. I never thanked you properly, you know, Fiona said, for saving my life. You didn't need to. You gave me a reason to live it. That's thanks enough." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow accumulate on the fence rails and the barn roof. Somewhere inside, their grandchildren were making noise, probably driving Jamie and Sarah crazy. The sound of their laughter drifted out through the windows, a reminder of the legacy they'd built. "We did good, didn't we?" Fiona asked softly. Lucas squeezed her shoulder. "We did better than good. We built something real, something that'll last long after we're gone. 3 kids, 8 grandchildren so far, and a ranch that'll keep the Matthews name alive for generations. Not bad for a cowboy and a shopkeeper's daughter. Not bad at all." As the sun set and the stars began to emerge, painting the sky with points of light, Fiona thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. The blizzard that had nearly killed her. The cowboy who'd saved her. The love that had grown between them, starting as a spark and building into a flame that had sustained them through 3 decades of life together. She thought about the woman she'd been at 22, heading east with dreams of teaching and independence. That woman had no idea that her real life, her real purpose, was waiting for her 5 miles away in the arms of a man she hadn't met yet. Sometimes Fiona wondered what would have happened if she'd stayed in town that day, if she'd never gotten caught in the storm. Would she have eventually gone back east? Would she have become that teacher she'd dreamed of being? Would she have married someone else, had a different life entirely? But those thoughts never lasted long, because she couldn't imagine any life better than the one she had. Every moment of joy, every challenge overcome, every child born and grandchild held, all of it had been worth that terrifying walk through the snow. The blizzard hadn't taken her life. It had given her one beyond anything she could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his voice pulling her back to the present. "Everything. Nothing. How lucky I am." "We both are. Lucky to have found each other. Lucky to have built this life together." Fiona tilted her head back to look at him, seeing the lines that age had etched into his face, the silver threading through his dark hair. He was still the most handsome man she'd ever seen, and she loved him more now than she had at 22. Young love was passionate and exciting, but it couldn't compare to the deep, abiding connection they'd forged through years of partnership and devotion. "I love you," she said, simple words that carried the weight of 3 decades. "I love you too. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." Lucas stood, pulling Fiona to her feet. "Come on, it's getting cold out here. Let's go inside where it's warm." But before they went in, Fiona looked back at the snow-covered land one more time. Somewhere out there, miles away, was the place where Lucas had found her all those years ago. The place where her life had truly begun. She sent a silent thank you to that younger version of herself, the one who'd been brave enough to venture out in a storm, foolish enough to think she could make it alone. That woman had been wrong about so many things. But she'd been right about one. The West was a place of freedom and possibility. It was a place where you could reinvent yourself, where you could find the life you were meant to live. For Fiona, that life had started with a blizzard and a cowboy. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to love and perseverance. As she walked inside with Lucas's hand in hers, surrounded by the sounds of her family, she knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single thing. The blizzard had nearly taken her life, but Lucas had given it back to her, richer and fuller than she'd ever dreamed possible. And that, Fiona thought as she closed the door against the cold December night, was the greatest gift anyone could receive. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new memories and milestones. Fiona and Lucas celebrated their 40th anniversary, surrounded by their entire extended family. By then, They had 12 grandchildren ranging from infants to teenagers, all bearing the Matthews name or carrying it forward through their mothers. The ranch had grown into one of the largest and most respected operations in Wyoming. Jamie ran the day-to-day operations now, with help from his sons and Teddy. Lucas still kept his hand in, offering advice and occasionally helping with major decisions, but he'd largely stepped back to enjoy his later years. Fiona had done the same, handing over the account books to Anna's husband David, who proved to have a sharp mind for finances. She spent her time now with her grandchildren, reading to them and teaching them their letters, finally fulfilling her dream of being a teacher in the way that mattered most. On their 45th anniversary, Lucas surprised Fiona with a trip. Not anywhere exotic or distant, but back to the place where he'd found her in the snow all those years ago. It took some doing to find the exact spot. The landscape had changed over the decades. But Lucas had remembered, and he led her to a small rise near the creek fork. "This is it," he said. "This is where you were buried in that drift." Fiona looked around, trying to reconcile this peaceful summer meadow with the deadly white expanse she remembered. Wildflowers bloomed everywhere, their colors bright against the green grass. A light breeze carried the scent of sage and sunshine. "Hard to believe it was ever that frightening," she said. "I was terrified," Lucas admitted. "When I first saw you, I thought I was too late. You were so still, so pale. I've never been more scared in my life. But you didn't give up. You never give up, Lucas. That's what I love about you." Lucas pulled her close, and they stood there together, two people in their late 60s who'd somehow managed to find each other in the vastness of the Wyoming territory. Against all odds, against every obstacle, they'd built a life worth living. "I'd do it again," Lucas said. "Carry you 100 miles if I had to. 1,000. You're worth it, Fiona. You've always been worth it." Fiona kissed him, this man who'd saved her life and then spent 45 years making it worth saving. "And I'd fall into that snowdrift again if it meant finding you. We were meant to be, Lucas Matthews. Nothing was going to stop that." They stayed at that spot for a long time, remembering and reflecting. Then they rode back to the ranch together, Lucas helping Fiona mount her horse with the same care he'd shown when she'd first injured her ankle all those years ago. As they approached the Double M, they could see the sprawling complex it had become. The original house had been expanded several times. New buildings dotted the landscape, barns, bunkhouses, a proper stable for Teddy's horse breeding operation. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, a sign of the many families that now called the ranch home. "Look at what we built," Fiona said softly. "Look at what you built," Lucas corrected. "I just provided the land. You made it a home, made it mean something. We did it together, just like everything else." That evening, surrounded by 3 generations of Matthews, Fiona felt a deep sense of peace. This was her legacy, not just the ranch or the money or the land, but the people. The family she'd created with Lucas, the love they'd passed down to their children and grandchildren, that would outlast any building or business. That was what truly mattered. As the party wound down and the grandchildren were tucked into various beds throughout the house, Fiona and Lucas found themselves alone on the porch again. It had become their spot over the years, the place where they could talk and think and just be together. 45 years, Fiona mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like we've been together forever. "Both are true," Lucas said. "Every day with you is fresh and new, but you're also so much a part of me that I can't remember what life was like before. I can. It was lonely. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was so lonely. My mother was dying, my father was struggling, and I was trying to be strong for everyone. I didn't have anyone to be weak with, anyone who saw the real me. And now I have you. My partner, my best friend, my love. You've seen me at my worst and loved me anyway. You've celebrated my triumphs and held me through my failures. You've been everything I needed, even when I didn't know I needed it. Lucas was quiet for a moment, and when Fiona looked over, she saw tears glistening in his eyes. I don't have fancy words like you do, he said roughly. I'm just a rancher, not a poet. But you're my whole world, Fiona. Everything good in my life came from the day I found you in that snow. Our kids, our grandkids, this ranch, all of it traces back to that moment. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. They held each other as the stars came out. Two old people who'd loved each other for nearly half a century and would continue loving each other until their last breath. The blizzard that had brought them together was long past, but its echoes remained in every aspect of their lives. Fiona lived to the age of 73, passing peacefully in her sleep with Lucas holding her hand. She'd lived a full, rich life, had seen her grandchildren grow and even met 3 great-grandchildren. She'd built a legacy of love and perseverance that would echo through the Matthews family for generations. Lucas followed her 2 years later, his heart simply giving out one morning as he stood on the porch looking out at the land he loved. His last words, spoken to Jamie who'd been visiting, were about Fiona. "Tell her I'm coming," he'd said with a smile. "Tell her to wait for me." They were buried side by side in the family cemetery on the Double M, under matching headstones that bore simple inscriptions. Fiona's read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she built a home from love." Lucas's said, "Devoted husband, father, and grandfather, he never gave up." But perhaps the most fitting memorial was the ranch itself, still thriving under the Matthews name more than a century later. The story of how Lucas had carried Fiona 5 miles through a blizzard became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It became a reminder of what love could accomplish, of the strength that came from 2 people choosing each other every single day. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick and white across the Wyoming plains, the current generation of Matthews' children would sit by the fire and listen to their parents tell the story. The story of a woman who'd nearly died in a blizzard and the cowboy who'd saved her. The story of how one act of courage and compassion had sparked a love that built an empire. The story of Lucas and Fiona Matthews, whose love had proved stronger than any storm.